Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Buzzcast. My name is Karen Connolly. I'm the VP of Operations for Altera Group, and you're probably already familiar with Appraisal Buzz. I presume that's how you found your way to this Buzzcast. We publish the Appraisal Buzz newsletter specifically for real estate appraisers. It goes out twice a week. We also publish the Appraisal Buzz magazine that goes out twice a year. And before we launch into our discussion today, let me tell you a little bit about ACI. As a provider of innovative appraisal solutions for more than 40 years, ACI is a trusted industry leader. Join the thousands of appraisers and many of the largest appraisal companies that use ACI software to optimize their business. The ACI One Individual Plan is available today for $649, and it includes forms and rules, sketch software, unlimited location and flood maps, public record data, ACI Open House, and more. For more information, you can visit aciweb.com. And with that, Joan, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joan Trice. I'm the founder and CEO of Altera Group, and we have a Appraisal Buzzcast interview today with Jeremy Bagott. And Jeremy is the author of Dispatches from the Cosmic Cobra Breeding Farm. And I got to begin, Jeremy, by just asking you, what in the world does that title mean? What's a Cobra Breeding Farm?
Well, the title was, I chose a literary title, just as something to interest, maybe interest the casual reader. I think a title like Appraisal Regulations, Where Have We Gone Wrong would not have
gotten a lot of attention.
No.
I would say you had me at hello with the title
Yes.
of the book. I most definitely was intrigued. I actually bought the book and I read the book. So and I referred a lot of people to buy your book. So
well, I think, you know, if you owed me anything, that's now been zeroed out because you bought my book and you read it. So,
see, okay. See,
so the title comes from the concept of the Cobra effect, which, to put it briefly, is if a government ever wants to increase the quantity of an undesirable thing, all it has to do is to offer a bounty for one of those things, and they will inadvertently increase the number over time. And this particular Cobra effect was coined from a situation in the Raj in India during the British rule of the Indian subcontinent. And so administrators in Delhi were trying to eliminate the risk from cobra bites. And so they, without thinking, they put a bounty on every dead cobra. You would receive a certain number of rupees if you turned in a dead cobra. So what that did is, in pretty quick order, it created a market for dead cobras, and breeders got into the act and they bred cobras. And then when the administrators realized what was going on, they stopped the whole thing, which then resulted in the breeders just releasing their breeding stock into the surrounding area. And at the end of the day, they had more cobras. And that Cobra effect, you see that with offering a bounty for tails of dead prairie dogs. If prairie dogs have tails, I don't know, actually. Or regulation mills. If you incentivize a nonprofit to create regulations, and if the government awards its seal of approval to certain nonprofits to produce certain outsourced copyrighted regulations, it will result in more regulations. It incentivizes the creation of and the revision of regulations.
Well, then that obviously leads us into the topic of, you know, what's the book about? And so why don't you give us a quick synopsis of what inspired you to write it and what it's all about?
Well, the book itself is it's a romp through a target-rich environment of waste and abuse and hubris and dysfunction. And so what I want, my
Wait a
goal.
minute, you're talking about the appraisal profession here.
No, I'm talking about the appraisal regulatory profession.
Okay, okay, all right.
Yes, not appraisers, not mom and pop appraisers. I'm
Okay.
talking about this organism, this multi-headed organism that has attached itself to a profession. And so my goal, and I still am not 100% sure that I succeeded, but my goal was to try to explain this weird little world that we live in to the average reader who may or may not have interest in administrative law or in constitutional law, or just provide enough gee whiz moments that a casual reader might be interested in this.
The hope would be, I would think, that maybe it changes some behavior. I think that would be good for the profession.
Thank you, Joan. Our thanks goes out to our sponsor, AMROC. AMROC is hiring staff appraisers. Your best career move starts at amroc.com/careers. Joan, you have the mic.
I know, I'm no longer a licensed appraiser, but I started appraising back in '81 pre-licensing. And and I haven't practiced for a very long time. I got out of the appraisal business at about 2000 because I thought the world was coming to an end then. I thought appraisal independence had gotten so corrupted. So I missed, 8 good years of seeing the market go wild, and there was plenty of business out there. But the reason I dropped my license, I would have been happy to have kept up with fees and the other requirements. I couldn't bring myself to take USPAP one more time. I just couldn't do it. It's like brain damage. I've taken this over and over and over again, and it's pointless. And I just, so I gave it up. So,
Joan?
Yes.
My point in writing the in writing the book was not to attack the concept of USPAP or any such outsourced standard. There is a good reason to have a standard. In fact, if you look at well, let me just back up a little bit. 1968 was the first year in which a private code, a private fire code, or a code that's with engineering specifics for pressure vessels or for ships at sea. 1968 was the first year that the federal government allowed private standards to be incorporated by reference into a regulation or into a statute.
Right.
So before that, the country relied on private standards. Could be the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, or NAFPA, the National Fire Protection Association, or excuse me, the American Bureau of Shipping, ABS. That's an institution that's been around since around the Civil War. And just like USPAP, the American Bureau of Shipping will not tell you how to build a ship. Just like the USPAP will not tell you exactly how to appraise a property, but it will tell you, here's where the center of buoyancy had better be. Here's how thick the hull had better be for a vessel this size with this configuration. And these are good things, but
Agreed. I like standards. I'm not against standards. I just, as an appraisal professional, was perturbed that it changed on a regular cycle.
Yes.
And I was forced to buy the book and take the course over and over and over again.
So what these standard setting organizations have learned pretty quickly is that if you choose, first of all, the U.S. government does a terrible job of picking winners and losers. You only need to look at Solyndra during the Obama administration, or what's happening with Eastman Kodak right now.
Right.
The government decided, okay, you're going to be the official purveyor of X, Y, and Z, and we're going to give you a big fat grant, and then so right off the bat, the government does a very bad job generally of picking winners and losers. And if they do, there's waste. There's a lot of waste.
Right.
So before 1968, the government, the federal government, and state governments used some of these standards for their own procurement of products. So when the American Society of Mechanical Engineers came out with a series of standards on pressure vessels, it was a huge thing, and it helped the government. There were prior to the development of that standard, you have these horrific boiler explosions. 1905 in Brockton, Massachusetts, a shoe factory. The boiler exploded, caused the entire building to collapse and killed a bunch of people, maybe upwards of 100 workers. And there was a horrific explosion in the days following the end of the Civil War on the USS Sultana, where 3 of its 4 boilers exploded, and it sank in the Mississippi River and killed, pretty heartbreaking, it killed a bunch of recently released Union prisoners of war.
Mm.
And so I think some of the mischief began occurring when the government said, not only do we like these privately held copyrighted standards, but we're going to now allow you to reference the standard in a regulation. And then we're going to enforce those standards. Now, we're not going to print the whole standard because that would be a copyright infringement, right? If they printed the use path in its entirety in the Federal Register, it would be a copyright infringement against the Appraisal Foundation. They own the copyrights to the use path. So what they decided to do, they approved, this was in the 1968 Freedom of Information Act, of all things, a little provision that allowed for this mechanism. So anyway, once that happened, it really was a case of the government choosing winners and losers. And so I can tell you that if the FDIC and the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency and the Federal Credit Union Association and the other regulators had chosen the Appraisal Institute to be the official purveyor of the appraisal standards, it would just be a matter of months before the Appraisal Institute figured out that they have this tremendous coercive power now. Suddenly, they can hold out the tin cup and seek grant money to maintain the standards, which the Appraisal Foundation has been doing since its inception. Possibly this year, not
will be an exception to that, right?
And then so you can get a grant to develop and maintain the standard, and then you can charge whatever the market will bear for the standard itself. And I'm not sure I need to point out that the Appraisal Foundation has a franchise. They have a monopoly. They are the official. If you want to purchase a copy of USPAP, you're going to have to pay the Appraisal Foundation. It's something like $75, whether you buy the PDF or the hard copy. So there are some legal scholars that have been very vocal. It's a little corner of administrative law. It's a fraternity, the people who study this. Peter L. Strauss, a law professor at Columbia, studies this at the federal level. And then a professor, Alan Morrison at George Washington University, studies it at the state level. Nina Mendelsohn at University of Michigan. And also there's a great crusader, publicresource.org, named Carl Malamud, who has actually taken some of these standards. He's put them on he must have terabytes of storage. He's put them on his servers and then made them available. And then he's dared these organizations to sue him. And another thing that he's done is a few years back, the state of Georgia tried to paywall their state code and statutes and also their court decisions. And so if you want to access court decision in the state of Georgia, that's fine. You just have to sign up for this service and pay a certain amount each month. And now you get beyond the paywall. So what he did is he signed up and then he uploaded the entire thing to his server, and now he made it available. He got sued by the state of Georgia. And I don't know if that's reached a conclusion or not, but anyway, there's no, and there's a long history, Joan, of these of cities and counties and states and the federal government even trying to sell you information that you've already paid for in tax dollars for them to produce. Things like fire codes and court decisions, and there have been some very interesting cases. So anyway, what the Appraisal Foundation is doing is it's doing exactly what you would predict that it would do. It's created a whole ecosystem, or it started with the uniform standards. I noticed going way back to my first uniform standards in 2002, there wasn't a copyright symbol on it, only the line "all rights reserved" or "rights reserved," something like that. And then the copyright symbol came out later. What they're doing is they're taking our seed money, that grant money, and it's some years it's been upwards of $1 million they've received, and that comes out of our national registry fee.
Right.
So they get a grant. They get this. There's this patronage stream from the Appraisal Subcommittee, which is a federal agency.
Right.
It's not a congressional subcommittee, as the name might imply to some. There's a little bit of confusion. It's actually under the FFIEC, which is answers to the FDIC, and it's an executive branch entity. But the Appraisal Subcommittee then provides this grant to the Appraisal Foundation, which is a 501c3 organization. And so the grant then is used, at least nominally, for maintenance and upkeep of the copyrighted Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice, the copyrighted AQB criteria. And then they have now begun to receive a second grant, which goes to help state enforcement. And that goes to maintain some enforcement standards that they've also copyrighted, along with another 501c3 called Arrow of enforcement officials. They both copyright. Both of those organizations own the copyright, but we're paying for it.
But you're talking about the investigator training, is
the
that?
Investigator training?
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
The investigator training courses. And so, but then it's worse than that. It's not that we're just paying. We're fronting the R&D money for changes and also for upkeep of those copyrighted products. But then we're also paying for those. In the case of the uniform standards, when you go and you buy your new copy, and an organization, a nonprofit like the Appraisal Foundation, has every financial incentive to keep changing the thing, because remember, they're teaching the teachers, they're credentialing the teachers, they're teaching the enforcers, they're writing the test questions. They have their tentacles out. They have corporate partners and sponsors, and they're involved in international valuation, standardization efforts, and things like that. Nonprofit, and there are a lot of very reputable nonprofits in America. It's not a rent-seeking organization per se. They're not trying to maximize profits for their shareholders, but the way that you see nonprofits being wasteful and abusive usually is with excessive travel, lots of junkets, perks, like for instance, there was the United Way. God, I hope I got that right. Was it the United Way scandal back a couple of decades ago, where the chief executive was, he had as part of his ex officio benefits, was traveling around in a Gulfstream 4 or something, and basically the perks come out in the form of swollen salaries, benefit packages, golden handshakes, and travel benefits, because remember, they're not getting shares in it or stock options or anything like that. It's a nonprofit organization. So when a government says, "Hey, you're okay, Appraisal Institute, you're going to now be the official purveyor of the standards,"
You're
then they start doing
suggesting
that.
you just move the problem to
Right.
Yeah.
And then the Appraisal Foundation would suddenly realize, wow, wait a minute, we better produce some things, because we can no longer sell these things by edict. No longer can we sell the use pap and the guidance, and the guide notes and all of the notes, the annotations and things. Now now the Appraisal Foundation would be in the same boat that the Appraisal Institute is in, to just name two organizations. But
Right.
once a government, a state or a local or a federal government blesses an outside standard setter with being the official code, all kinds of very predictable things happen.
Well, tell us what, I remember in the book, Incorporation by reference. Tell us exactly what that means. I think.
Okay, so incorporation by, okay, so first a little bit of, just a very, very quick civics lesson, government lesson. You have statutes on one side, and that's the statutes, also called acts. Those live mostly on the legislative side, okay? And then you have a corresponding regulation, which are also sometimes called codes, and those live on the executive branch side. And they kind of work, there's a synergy between the two. So for instance, you look at, in California, you look at the statute, it's something like the business, or in any state, it would say something like the Business Licensing Act of 1995 or something. You'd see, and you could go to appraisal boards and you can read, almost always, they provide the statute, the act, that authorizes the use of USPAP. And then they provide a regulation, which is often called the Business Licensing Code. And then there'll be a section that deals with appraisals, appraisers. And that's going to have usually the word code in it. So the act broadly, so if you want to embed a private set of standards into the law, it's called, insiders call it IBR, incorporation by reference. You can do that. You have to have in most cases, you have to have a statute that enables the use of this outside standard. And then in the regulation, you have not only, you have a more detailed set of rules that kind of where the rubber meets the road on the regulation side. So one thing about a regulation that a statute doesn't have is a regulation involves the public. In everything but, I would say, emergency regulations, say at the state level, if you want to create a new regulation, it has to go through what's called a rulemaking process. And that rulemaking process, by design, involves the public. There's usually, it's a notice and comment period. There's a proclamation in the state register, for example. At the federal level, it's the Federal Register. It has to go through executive branch agencies. Like, for instance, there may be a small business ombudsman that has to sign off on it. How will this regulation affect small business? There may be, maybe the Department of Finance has to sign off on it. Maybe there has to be a cost benefit analysis. It varies from state to state. But almost uniformly, there's this process that you must go through to enact a regulation.
Well, you've given us a lot of thought, obviously.
But I can tell you a little bit more, Joan.
Well,
if your eyes aren't glazing over,
no, they're not. Keep going.
Okay,
Keep going.
all right. So what's happened though, and this is a pitfall of this incorporation by reference, is that in California, and every state I've looked at, there's an Administrative Procedure Act, a statute that says, okay, public agencies, you can incorporate an outside code or standard like USPAP into a regulation, but you've got to do a rulemaking for the initial version, and then any version thereafter, you have to do a new rulemaking. You can't just let it ride. So this is where executive branch agencies get into trouble. Some folks call it creating underground regulations. It's essentially official corruption. The executive branch agency may just not care, and they may not do a rulemaking for each version, and figuring no one's gonna call them out, no one's gonna challenge them. All of these standard setting organizations, almost without fail, they do a process for changing the standards. Like, for instance, the National Fire Protection Association, if they want to change the NAFPA 80 standard, I think that's for liquefaction of natural gas. If they want to change it, they have a board of experts, of subject matter experts that convene. There's a process where the members of a profession or interested parties can comment. They have meetings in hotel banquet rooms sometimes, and people speak. It's like a public hearing. But the only problem is with these private, like for instance, the Appraisal Standards Board. The problem with these private panels is they aren't recognized by any state or by the federal government. Now they do no doubt do yeoman's work. It's interesting. What the feedback that you get is certainly interesting. What goes on at these meetings, but nobody, like for instance, no member of the Appraisal Standards Board has taken an oath to faithfully uphold the duties of any office in the state of California or in the state of New Mexico or the state of Texas. They are unknown. They're essentially private persons. So it is by design that the states have to do a rulemaking that is very similar to this process, but it's a legal, official process. And to be quite honest, the members of any of these in some cases, they're paid panelists. In the case of the ASB and the AQB, they're paid panelists. In the case of the NFPA, they're volunteers, but it makes no matter. They're just simply not recognized by any government. However, if you look in a lot of the regulations and statutes, the appraisal board of this or that state, or in California, the Bureau of Real Estate Appraisers, they include them in these statutes and regulations as if they are an official, as if they are somehow part of government, part of state government or federal government, but it's always flies in the face of the states, except in this case of North Carolina, strangely enough, but it most often flies in the face of the state's Administrative Procedure Act. It says you can't do that. You can't just say, okay, you can incorporate a unnamed version of USPAP. That's going to be, and all appraisers must conform to the most recent version, or you can't do that. You have to every version. So for the 2018, 2019 USPAP, Kansas, Kentucky, Wisconsin, Michigan, Maine, all put them through a rulemaking. So they're following their laws, Administrative Procedures Act.
So they have to change their law to incorporate the new version of USPAP every cycle? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, the
Wow.
Business Licensing Act in many of these states is flawed and needs to be challenged. It just says, it essentially, if you read between the lines, it says we are either too swamped, or we have no interest, or we have other fish to fry. So
Right.
we're not going to do this. We're just going to rely on whatever the this board of subject matter experts tells us to rely on. But if you look at that same state's Administrative Procedures Act and administrative code on how to draft, on how to do rulemaking and what is considered a proper rulemaking, it almost always says there must be a revision date.
So there's they're not complying, right, with, that's it. That's really interesting.
Thank you, Joan. We can't bring you this podcast without our sponsors. Clearbox has recently added new subscribers who are aggressively building out their panel. In each case, these new subscribers are requiring background checks. Clearbox is offering a discounted background check for 30 days for just $39. Sign up today at clearbox.com. You can attract new clients, and don't forget to use coupon code CLEAR10. That's all lowercase, CLEAR10. Back to you, Joan.
I know some think you vilified Dave Bunton in the book. I didn't get that impression. I think you're challenging the process of USPAP and what maybe the procedures of the foundation, but I didn't see any ad hominem attacks.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. If anything, when you have this, you have this regulatory, I think we can all agree, some degree of regulation is absolutely necessary for this profession. Ideally, these mortgages, in the case of, let's say, a residential mortgage, they would not be aggregated and securitized and sold off to widows and orphans. Ideally, the banks or the thrifts that originated the paper, they would hold them. So they would have a lot of vested interest in making sure that their analysts and appraisers were good ones. Right. But we're not living in that system. It's not the Bailey thrift and loan or whatever, anymore. It's a different system. So that's okay with, we need some regulation, but there is no deity that's looking down on all this and saying, the regulation got a little bit too heavy on the appraisers. We need to lighten it up. What's happening is the numbers are falling and the appraisers are aging out. And there's what George Mason scholars call the Mercatus Center call regulatory accumulation. Every time the USPAP is changed, or any state regulations or Fannie Mae guidelines or anything, there's never an even Steven swap out. There's always an accumulation over time. And so there is no czar there is no magic grandpa that's looking down and going, you went too far, appraisal found with the new version of you, with the 2020-21 version of USPAP, you went a little too far, and that's going to result in an additional 1,800 appraisers dropping out of or something like that. There's no, the main, if you're someone like Dave Butt at the Appraisal, captaining an organization like the Appraisal Foundation, you don't want to kill the host. You have this, you're this outside organism that's doing all of these things. And that's what they're incentivized to do. If anything you could say about Dave Button, he's exhibiting marvelous technical bravura, and he's by the Appraisal Foundation being involved in so many little corners, and he's made the Appraisal Foundation indispensable, and that's the goal of any standard-setting nonprofit that has been lucky enough to have its standards selected as the official standard, the one that's incorporated into a statute and into regulations.
So let's close with this. You've identified what's wrong about it in the process. What do you think it should look like?
Okay, that is a great question. So it may not be completely obvious, but I think the white hot core of all of the dysfunction is that 2-year change cycle of the uniform standards.
I would agree with you.
When the State Railroad Commission of Texas decided to incorporate these 2 NAFTA standards, one had to do with liquefying natural gas, the other has to do with gas fuel code. They took a great amount of time, and they didn't just assume that the most recent standards, the most recent NAFTA standards are the best ones. So they selected, one was the 2006 version, and one was the 2008 version, and they put it through a rulemaking. And they checked all the boxes. There was an analysis on how it would affect how changing the standard, incorporating these private standards would affect small business in Texas. How they had a notice and comment rulemaking, public hearings. They checked all the boxes. They did it right. It took them months, but these 2 standards are now incorporated into Texas law, into Texas regulations by the Railroad Commission of Texas. With the USPAP, that's first of all, there are states that don't. Okay, I'll give you an example. In California, it takes sometimes more than 2 years to do a rulemaking. And I was told by someone who spoke to me on the condition of anonymity that it's not the notice and comment part. It's not the public hearings and the promulgation and the state register. It's if some attorney 3 levels up at the Department of Finance or in the governor's office doesn't like something in the rulemaking package, it goes all the way back to the Bureau of Real Estate Appraiser, and it starts all over again. And there's nothing to ensure that a rulemaking can be done in 2 years. And even if it could be done in 2 years, it would mean putting the 2019 or 2018, 2019 USPAP through a 2-year rulemaking process, and then having to immediately start a new rulemaking process in this very narrow window when the 2020, 2021 USPAP comes out. So it's not practical. So I feel like in California, Washington State, Texas, New Mexico, and South Carolina, and there may be other states, that they just don't do it, and they hope nobody notices. They maybe admit that it's dysfunctional, and they bluff.
Right. Interesting.
So I would say slow down. We need to slow down that change cycle, and that will, in effect, it'll freeze the organism a little bit.
Right.
That's feeding off this profession.
Right. I apologize for, I guess I was so excited to talk about the book. I introduced you and the title of the book, but I didn't really ask you about you and your profession. And I think you're an MAI. Are you also an SRA too?
No, I'm not. No, I'm an MAI, and they also have the AI GRS designations.
Okay. Well,
And
tell us a little bit about your appraisal background.
So I've been working in right-of-way, which I'm convinced, in fact, has just become a euphemism for eminent domain, whether we admit it or not. So I've been working in that area for about 8 years. And I've done bank work. I started as a residential trainee and worked my way kind of through the ranks. And I was active during the run-up to the 2007, 2008, crisis. And I was present during the recovery, and found right-of-way work to be very interesting. And I think I've developed a very detailed set of skills in dealing with irate property owners. And, a lot of it has to do with empathy, body language. So yeah, I've seen a lot of different little corners of appraisal. And so I feel like, I may be close enough to retirement at this point to maybe, make some waves.
Yeah.
And be a professional citizen.
Stir the pot a little bit.
Yeah.
Along the way. Well, I hope you have another book.
There may be something in the works, but it won't be. It's not going to be in this little subject area. It'll be in something different.
Well, there's definitely a book about the last crisis that.
Yes.
Yet to be written.
Yes,
from the appraiser, the collateral side of the equation, which completely. We always seem to be sort of the redheaded stepchild. No offense to any redheads out there.
No offense to redheads.
Yeah, exactly. Got to be very sensitive these days. Jeremy, with that, I'm going to wrap it up. And I really enjoyed talking to you today. Oh, and I also want to tell our viewers that I want you to you have a petition, I believe, and I want you to post that on our buzzforum.net.
Okay.
And then everybody there can ask you questions about your petition. So we'll see you online at buzzforum.net.
All right, that sounds good.
All right.
Okay. All right, thanks, Joan.
What a great discussion. We'd like to thank our listeners for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. We look forward to the next time, and we hope everybody stays safe out there.